The air hung thick and still, heavy with dust and the scent of sweat and fear. Sunlight beat down on the raised platform, bleaching the raw wood, making the faces in the crowd below blur into a single, expectant mass. Sarah clutched her daughter's thin hands, their small bodies pressed against her skirts, trembling. This was the end. Her husband, taken by the fever last spring, had left them with nothing but debt and this public degradation. She was chattel now, her worth measured in dollars, her future tied to the whim of the highest bidder. Her chest ached with a physical pain that mirrored the raw wound in her soul. Despair was a suffocating cloak, tighter than any shawl she owned. She tried to breathe, but the dust caught in her throat. Her gaze swept over the faces, searching for anything other than avarice or idle curiosity. There was nothing, just judgment and the cold calculation of men buying flesh and bone. The auctioneer, a man with a voice like gravel, droned on, listing her meager attributes, her age, the fact she had birthed twins. He spoke of her as if she were a mare or a tool, stripping away her humanity with every word. Her daughters, 10 years old, twin sparrows with wide, frightened eyes, buried their faces against her, muffling small whimpers. Sarah stroked their hair, the only comfort she could offer. She couldn't bear to look at them, couldn't bear to see her own helplessness reflected in their fear. Her thoughts were a frantic prayer, not for escape that seemed impossible now, but for a bidder who might offer a flicker of mercy, a master who wouldn't separate them. Separation was a fate worse than any servitude she could imagine. The bidding began, a low murmur at first, then rising, men calling out numbers that assigned value to her despair. She didn't look at them. Her focus was on a point just past the crowd, trying to hold onto some semblance of inner stillness. It felt like standing naked in the square, every vulnerability exposed. The numbers climbed, slow and steady, each increase a nail in the coffin of her old life, whatever little dignity remained. She heard the gasps from the crowd, the low whistles, the excited chatter. She was expensive. That brought no relief, only a different kind of dread. What kind of man would pay so much? Then, a new voice cut through the air, clear and unexpected. It wasn't loud, but it carried an authority that silenced the others for a moment. The auctioneer paused, peering into the crowd. $300, he boomed, repeating the bid. It was higher than anyone else had offered. A hush fell over the square. Sarah risked a glance in the direction of the voice. He stood slightly apart from the main cluster of bidders, near the edge of the crowd, a tall, lean figure in worn, unremarkable clothes. A cowboy, judging by his hat and dusty boots. His face was shadowed by the brim, but she saw the set of his jaw, the steady, unblinking gaze fixed not on her, but on the auctioneer. He looked quiet, different, not like the others, whose eyes had lingered with unpleasant speculation. He looked like stone. The bidding stalled. The auctioneer urged, cajoled, but the moment had passed. The other men seemed hesitant to challenge this quiet figure, or perhaps the price had simply gone too high for their purposes. The gavel fell with a sharp crack that echoed in the sudden silence. Sold. The word landed like a blow. Sold. She was sold. Her daughters were sold. To a stranger. To this silent cowboy she couldn't even properly see. A man stepped forward from the crowd. Not the cowboy, but a different man, the town clerk, holding papers. The cowboy approached the platform with a slow, deliberate stride. As he drew nearer, Sarah saw his face more clearly. It was weathered, lined, a landscape of hardship etched into sun-beaten skin. His eyes, when they finally met hers for a fleeting second, were an indeterminate color, watchful, revealing nothing. There was no cruelty there, no malice, but no warmth either. Just an unnerving stillness. He didn't smile. He didn't speak to her. He spoke to the clerk, his voice low, requesting the necessary papers be drawn up. Sarah held her daughters tighter, her heart a frantic bird trapped in her chest. She had been bought by this quiet, unknowable man. Her life and the lives of her children now belonged to him. The future stretched before her, a vast, terrifying unknown. The journey from town was silent, save for the creak of the wagon wheels and the occasional soft rustle of prairie grass. The cowboy, who introduced himself simply as Elias, rode his horse alongside the wagon, never getting in with them. Sarah sat on the hard wooden seat, her daughters huddled on either side, clinging to her. The air was cooler now, the sun beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows that stretched and distorted the familiar landscape into something alien and menacing. Elias didn't speak to them, not a single word beyond his name and the direction they were headed. He rode with a quiet competence, his gaze sweeping the horizon, alert and focused on things she couldn't see. Fear still coiled in Sarah's stomach, a cold, persistent knot. What kind of man was he? Why had he bought them? A poor cowboy, the auctioneer had muttered, surprised by Elias's final bid. What could a poor cowboy want with a widow and 2 girls? The possibilities gnawed at her: hard labor, cruelty, something worse. She studied him from the corner of her eye when he wasn't looking. His back was straight, his movements economical. He handled the horse with a quiet confidence, no harsh reins or impatient clicks. When they stopped briefly to water the horse, he didn't offer them water, but he didn't forbid them from dipping the dipper into the trough either. A small thing, but she noted it. He was not outwardly cruel, at least not yet. They reached his place as dusk settled, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. It was a small, solitary cabin, set in a shallow coulee, almost hidden by the rising ground. It looked lonely. Stark. A single plume of smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting a fire already laid. It was more than she had expected. She'd feared a hovel or just a tent. It was humble, but it was solid. 2 corrals held a few horses and some scrawny cattle. This was his world. Isolated, quiet, hard. He dismounted stiffly, his spurs jingling faintly. He didn't offer a hand as she climbed down, helping the girls. He simply led his horse to the corral, unsaddled it, and then turned towards the cabin. "Come inside," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. It wasn't an invitation, but a command. Sarah gathered her daughters and their few possessions, following him into the dim interior. The cabin was clean, if spare. A rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a narrow bunk against one wall, a small stove glowing with warmth. He gestured towards the bunk. "You can sleep there." "I'll sleep on the floor." He didn't wait for a response. He moved to the stove, lifted a pot, and poured steaming water into tin cups, adding coffee grounds. He pushed 2 cups towards them, then poured one for himself. He sat at the table, sipping his coffee in silence. Sarah watched him, her daughters pressed close on the bunk. This was it, their new life, under the roof of this silent, solitary man. He made no demands that night, asked no questions. He simply existed in the small space with them, a quiet, unreadable presence. The girls, exhausted and frightened, eventually fell asleep in her arms. Sarah lay awake for a long time, listening to the crackle of the fire, the settling of the old cabin, and the steady sound of Elias's breathing from the floor. She felt utterly lost, adrift in a world she didn't understand, beholden to a man she knew nothing about. Yet, for the first time in days, the crushing weight of despair felt slightly less absolute. There was a roof over their heads. There was warmth. There was, for this night at least, safety from the elements and the leering eyes of the town. It was a fragile reprieve, born of necessity and the inscrutable will of the man who now owned them. The days bled into weeks, then months, marked by the relentless rhythm of the seasons and the quiet routine of the ranch. Sarah and her daughters settled into a life of hard work. There were chores from sunup to sundown, milking the few cows, tending a small, struggling garden, gathering wood, mending clothes, cooking the simple meals. Elias provided, but he did not coddle. He worked from dawn until dusk, riding the range, mending fences, tending the small herd. He still spoke little, but his silence no longer felt overtly threatening. It was simply his way. Sarah began to observe him. He was meticulous in his work. He was fair with the animals. He was utterly solitary, Yet he never made them feel unwelcome, only present. He never raised his voice. He never laid a hand on them, not even in anger. He simply gave quiet instructions or, more often, demonstrated what needed doing. The girls, initially terrified, began to relax around him. He didn't play with them, but he tolerated their presence. He showed them how to feed the chickens, how to brush the gentlest horse. One day, one of the girls fell and scraped her knee badly. Sarah rushed to her, but Elias was there first, kneeling with surprising speed. He didn't speak, but he carefully cleaned the wound with water from his canteen and tied a clean bandana around it. His hands, rough and calloused from work, were surprisingly gentle. It was a small moment, but it chipped away at Sarah's fear, replaced by a hesitant curiosity. Sarah discovered a strength she hadn't known she possessed. The necessity of their situation forged her. She learned to mend fences herself when Elias was away, to recognize the signs of a coming storm, to stretch meager rations into satisfying meals. She was no longer just a widow awaiting fate. She was a woman working to build a life, however circumscribed. The girls, too, adapted, becoming surprisingly capable helpers. They were small, but they were quick learners and willing hands. They were a unit now, the three of them, bound together by blood and circumstance. The bond with Elias grew not through conversation, but shared hardship and quiet presence. They ate meals together in silence, the only sounds the clinking of forks and the crackle of the fire. He watched them sometimes, his eyes unreadable, but she no longer felt like an object under scrutiny. She felt seen, not judged. Then came the winter, harsh and brutal. Snow piled high, drifts blocking the paths. The cold was a physical weight, seeping into their bones. Rations grew thin, and trouble came riding with the cold wind. A neighboring rancher, a burly, unpleasant man named Jedediah, who had coveted Elias's small spread for years, chose the blizzard as his opportunity. He arrived one frigid afternoon with 2 hired hands, claiming Elias's few head of cattle had strayed onto his land and were now his. It was a transparent lie, a calculated move to seize what was Elias's by force, using the cover of the storm and Elias's isolation. Sarah watched from the cabin window as Jedediah confronted Elias out by the corral. Jedediah was loud, blustering, his men flanking him, their hands near their guns. Elias stood his ground, quiet as ever, but his stillness now felt like the coiled tension before a strike. Sarah's heart pounded. Elias was alone. The nearest help was days away in this weather. Jedediah had chosen his moment well. She had seen the cruelty in Jedediah's eyes before, the same kind she had seen at the auction. He represented the world she had escaped, the world that saw people as property, there for the taking. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. This was the threat, not just to Elias, but to their fragile haven, to the quiet life they had built from the ashes of her despair. The confrontation escalated quickly outside. Jedediah grew impatient, his voice rising to a shout. He shoved Elias. Elias didn't back down. Sarah's daughters, sensing the tension, stood beside her at the window, small, silent sentinels. Sarah's mind raced. What could they do? Elias was outnumbered, outgunned. But this wasn't just Elias's fight. This was their fight. This cabin, this quiet life, it was theirs now too. The despair she had carried for so long had been replaced by something fierce and protective. She would not let them take this. She would not let them break what they had built. Elias moved with surprising speed, dodging Jedediah's clumsy lunge and landing a clean blow that sent the larger man staggering back. Jedediah's men started to draw their weapons. This was the moment. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed a heavy cast-iron pot from the stove, still warm from the embers. "Girls!" she snapped, her voice sharp, decisive. "The kerosene lamp! Quick!" The twins, their eyes wide but obedient, scrambled to obey, grabbing the lamp and matches. Bursting out of the cabin door, Sarah let out a yell that startled the men. She charged towards Jedediah's nearest man, not aiming to fight, but to distract, to create chaos. She swung the heavy pot wildly, forcing the man to recoil. Behind her, the girls, small and quick, had reached the corral fence. One fumbled with the matches, her hands trembling in the cold, while the other held the sputtering lamp high. The wind whipped at the flame. Jedediah's men, momentarily distracted by the unexpected appearance of the woman and children, hesitated. That hesitation was all Elias needed. He moved like a blur, disarming one man with a swift kick and grappling with the other. But Jedediah, enraged, was recovering, reaching for the gun tucked into his belt. "Now!" Sarah screamed to her daughters. The girls, with a final desperate effort, managed to ignite the dry tumbleweeds piled high against the downwind side of the corral. In moments, the dry brush caught fire, fanned by the biting wind. Flames erupted, rising quickly, creating a sudden, impassable barrier between Jedediah and the cabin. The wind carried the smoke directly towards Jedediah and his remaining man, stinging their eyes, forcing them to cough and recoil. Jedediah stopped, momentarily stunned by the sudden conflagration. His eyes darted from the fire to Elias, who now stood ready, and then to Sarah, who faced him down, the heavy pot still in her hand, her chest heaving, her fear replaced by a blazing defiance that mirrored the fire. Her daughters stood beside her, small and fierce, huddled together but unyielding. They were not helpless captives cowering inside. They were a force. "Get out," Sarah said, her voice low but carrying through the wind, utterly devoid of fear. "Get off his land. Get off our land." Jedediah stared at them, at the fire, at the surprisingly capable cowboy, and recognized defeat. He cursed under his breath, his face a mask of frustrated rage. He glared at Sarah, but she met his gaze steadily. He saw not a cowering widow, but a woman transformed, eyes hard with purpose, grounded on this land. Without another word, he and his remaining man mounted their horses and rode away, swallowed by the swirling snow and smoke. Silence fell once more, broken only by the roar of the fire and the wind. Elias stood watching their retreat, his guard still up. Only when they were specks on the horizon did the tension finally seem to drain from him. He turned and looked at Sarah and the girls, standing resolute against the backdrop of the dying fire. His face, usually so impassive, held a flicker of something she hadn't seen before: surprise, respect, maybe even gratitude. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. His gaze lingered on them, taking in their smudged faces, their trembling hands, the fierce light in their eyes. He walked over to the fence where the fire was beginning to die down, surveying the damage. Sarah and the girls watched him, catching their breath, the adrenaline slowly leaving their bodies. Later that night, huddled by the stove, the outside world silenced by the storm, Elias spoke, not about the attack, but about the future. He spoke of rebuilding the damaged fence, of the spring cattle drive, of needing extra hands. He spoke not as a master to his chattel, but as one partner to another, as one person planning with equals. Sarah listened, a quiet understanding dawning within her. He hadn't bought them for servitude, not truly. He had bought them because he was lonely, perhaps, or because he saw something in her despair that resonated with his own solitude. And in giving them shelter, he had inadvertently given them the ground upon which to reclaim their strength. She looked at her daughters, sleeping soundly on the bunk now, exhausted but safe. They had faced down a threat, not with physical strength, but with ingenuity and courage. They had saved their home. They had, in their own way, saved Elias too, showing him he wasn't alone, that this lonely place could be a haven, a family forged in shared hardship. Sarah had arrived a broken woman, auctioned like property, devoid of hope. She stood now, scarred but not defeated, on land that felt like her own, beside a man who had been a stranger and was becoming something else entirely. Resilience wasn't the absence of fear, she realized, but the action taken in its presence. Dignity wasn't something bestowed. It was something held onto, fought for. And sometimes, salvation came from the most unexpected places, delivered not by a rescuer from without, but by the quiet strength unearthed from within, amplified by the fierce, protective love of a mother and her children, willing to fight for the life they had been given and ultimately had helped to build. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, there was quiet, hard-earned peace, and the steady, hopeful glow of a fire that symbolized not just warmth against the cold, but the enduring flame of a family forged in fire.